Hey guys, today we are going to read class 10th History Rise of Nationalism in Europe. Hunger, hardship and popular revolt. The 1830s were years of great economic hardship in Europe. The first half of the 19th century saw an enormous increase in population all over Europe. In most countries, there were more seekers of job than employment. The population from rural areas migrated to the cities to live in overcrowded slums. Small producers in towns were often faced with stiff competition from imports of cheap machine-made goods from England, where industrialization was more advanced than on the continent. This was especially so in textile production, which was carried out mainly in homes or small workshops and was only partly mechanized. In those regions of Europe where the aristocracy still enjoyed power, peasants struggled again under the burden of feudal dues and obligations. The rise of food prices or a year of bad harvest led to widespread pauperism in town and country. The year of 1848 was one such year. Food shortages and widespread unemployment brought the population of Paris out on the roads. Barricades were erected and Louis Philippe was forced to flee. A a national assembly proclaimed a republic, granted suffrage to all adult males above 21, and guaranteed the right to work. National workshops to provide employment were set up. Earlier in 1845, weavers in Silesia had led a revolt against contractors who supplied them raw material and gave them orders for finished textiles but drastically reduced their payments. The journalist Wilhelm Wolff described the events in a Silesian village. Here is a story given you can read on your own. 1848, the revolution of liberals. Parallel to the revolts of the poor, unemployed, and starving peasants and workers in many European countries in the year 1848, a revolution led by educated middle classes was underway. Events of February 1848 in France had brought about the abdication of the monarch, and a republic based on universal male suffrage had been proclaimed. In other parts of Europe where independent nation states did not yet exist, such as Germany, Italy, Poland, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, men and women of the liberal middle classes combined their demands for constitutionalism with national unification. They took advantage of the growing popular unrest to push their demands for the creation of a nation state on parliamentary principles, a constitution, freedom of the press, and freedom of association. In the German regions, a large number of political associations whose members were middle-class professionals, businessmen, and prosperous artisans came together in the city of Frankfurt and decided to vote for an all-German National Assembly. On 18 May 1848, 831 elected representatives marched into a festive procession to take their places in the Frankfurt Parliament, convened in the Church of St. Paul. They drafted a constitution for a German nation to be headed by a monarchy subject to a parliament. When the deputies offered the crown on these terms to Frederick William IV, King of Prussia, he rejected it and joined other monarchs to oppose the elected assembly. While the opposition of the aristocracy and military became stronger, the social basis of parliament eroded. The parliament was dominated by the middle classes who resisted the demands of workers and artisans and consequently lost their support. In the end, troops were called in and the assembly was forced to disband. The issue of extending political rights to women was a controversial one within the liberal movement, in which large numbers of women had participated actively over the years. Women had formed their own political associations, founded newspapers, and taken part in political meetings and demonstrations. Despite this, they were denied They were denied suffrage rights during the election of the assembly. When the Frankfurt Parliament convened in the Church of St. Paul, women were admitted only as observers to stand in the visitor gallery. As you can see in this photo, women are only standing in the visitors gallery. Though conservative forces were able to suppress liberal movements in 1848, they could not restore the old order. Monarchs were beginning to realize that the cycles of revolution and repression could only be ended by granting concessions to the liberal nationalist revolutionaries. Hence, in the years after 1848, the autocratic monarchies of Central and Eastern Europe began to introduce the changes that had already taken place in Western Europe before 1815. Thus, serfdom and bonded labor were abolished both in the Habsburg dominions and in Russia. The Habsburg rulers granted were more autonomy to the Hungarians in 1867. The making of Germany and Italy. Germany. Can the army be the architect of a nation? After 1848, nationalism in Europe moved away from its association with democracy and revolution. Nationalist sentiments were often mobilized by conservatives for prompting state power and achieving political domination over Europe. This can be observed in the process by which Germany and Italy came to be unified as nation states. As you have seen, nationalist feelings were widespread among middle class Germans who in 1848 tried to unite the different regions of the German Confederation into a nation state, governed by an elected parliament. This liberal initiative to nation building was, however, repressed by the combined forces of the monarchy and the military, supported by the large landowners called Junkers of Prussia. From then on, Prussia took on the leadership of the movement for national unification. Its chief minister, Otto von Bismarck, was the architect of this process, carried out with the help of the Prussian army and bureaucracy. Three wars over 7 years with Austria, Denmark, and France ended in Prussian victory and completed the process of unification. In 1871, the Prussian King William I was proclaimed German Emperor in a ceremony held at Versailles. On the bitterly cold morning of 18 January 1871, an assembly comprising the princes of German states, representatives of the army, important Prussian ministers, including the chief minister Otto von Bismarck, gathered in the unheated Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles to proclaim the new German Empire headed by Kaiser William I of Prussia. The nation building process in Germany had demonstrated the dominance of Prussian state power. The new state placed a strong emphasis on modernizing the currency, banking, legal, and judicial systems in Germany. Prussian measures and practices often became a model for the rest of the Germany. Italy unified. Like Germany, Italy too had a long history of political fragmentation. Italians were scattered over several dynastic states as well as the multinational Habsburg Empire. During the middle of the 19th century, Italy was divided into seven states, of which only one, Sardinia Piedmont, was ruled by an Italian princely house. The north was under Austrian Habsburg, the center was ruled by the Pope, and the southern regions were under the domination of the Bourbon kings of Spain. Even the Italian language had not acquired one common form and still had many regional and local variations. During the 1830s, Giuseppe Mazzini had sought to put together a coherent program for a unitary Italian republic. He had also formed a secret society called Young Italy for the dissemination of his goals. The failure of revolutionary upsprings both in 1831 and 1848 meant that the mantle now fell on Sardinia Piedmont under its ruler King Victor Emmanuel to unify the Italian states through war. In the eyes of the ruling elites of this region, a unified Italy offered them the possibility of economic development and political dominance. Chief Minister Cavour, who led the movement to unify the regions of Italy, was neither a revolutionary nor a democrat. Like many other wealthy and educated members of Italian elite, he spoke French much better than he did Italian. Through a tactful diplomatic alliance with France engineered by Cavour, Sardinia Piedmont succeeded in defeating the Austrian forces in 1859. Apart from regular troops, a large number of armed volunteers under the leadership of Giuseppe Garibaldi joined the fray. In 1860, they marched into South Italy and the Kingdom of Two Sicilies and succeeded in winning the support of local peasants in order to drive out the Spanish rulers. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was proclaimed King of United Italy. However, much of the Italian population, among whom rates of illiteracy were very high, remained blissfully unaware of liberal nationalist ideology. The peasant masses who had supported Garibaldi in southern Italy had never heard of Italia and believed that La Talia was Victor Emmanuel's wife. The strange case of Britain. The model of the nation or the nation state, some scholars have argued, is Great Britain. In Britain, the formation of the nation state was not the result of a sudden upheaval or revolution. It was the result of a long drawn out process. There was no British nation prior to the 18th century. The primary identities of the people who inhabited the British Isles were ethnic ones such as English, Welsh, Scot, or Irish. All of these ethnic groups had their own cultural and political traditions. But as the English nation steadily grew in wealth and importance and power, it was able to extend its influence over the other nations of the islands. The English Parliament, which had seized power from the monarchy in 1688 at the end of the mm, protracted conflict, was the instrument through which a nation state with England at its centre came to be forged. The Act of Union 1707 between England and Scotland that resulted in the formation of United Kingdom of Great Britain meant in effect that England was able to impose its influence on Scotland. The British Parliament was henceforth dominated by its English members. The growth of a British identity meant that Scotland's distinctive culture and political institutions were systematically suppressed. The Catholic clans that inhabited the Scottish Islands suffered terrible repression whenever they attempted to assert their independence. The Scottish Highlanders were forbidden to speak their Gaelic language or wear their national dress, and large numbers were forcibly driven out of their homeland. Ireland suffered a similar fate. It was a country deeply divided between Catholics and Protestants. The English helped the Protestants of Ireland to establish their dominance over a largely Catholic country. Catholic revolts against British dominance were suppressed. After a failed revolt led by Wolfeton and his United Irishmen 1798, Ireland was forcibly incorporated into the United Kingdom in 1801. A new British nation was forged through the propagation of a dominant English culture. The symbols of the New Britain, the British flag, Union Jack, the national anthem, God Save Our Noble King, the English language were actively promoted, and the older nations survived only as subordinate partners in this union. Visualizing the nation. While it is easy enough to represent a ruler through a portrait or a statue, how does one go about giving a face to a nation? Artists in the 18th and 19th century found a way out by personifying a nation. In other words, they represented a country as if it were a person. Nations were then portrayed as female figures. The female form that was chosen to personify the nation did not stand for any particular woman in real life. Rather, it sought to give the abstract idea of the nation a concrete form. That is, the female figure became an allegory of the nation. You will recall that during the French Revolution, artists used the female allegory to portray ideas such as liberty, justice, and the republic. These ideals were represented through specific objects or symbols. As you would remember, the attributes of liberty are the red cap or the broken chain, while justice is generally a blindfolded woman carrying a pair of weighing scales. Similar female allegories were invented by artists in the 19th century to represent the nation. In France, she was christened Marianne, a popular Christian name which underlined the idea of people's nation. Her characteristics were drawn from those of liberty and the republic. The red cap, the tricolor, the cockade. Statues of Marianne were erected in public squares to remind the people of the national symbol of unity and to persuade them to identify with it. Marianne images were marked on coins and stamps. Similarly, Germania became the allegory of the German nation. In visual representations, Germania wears an oak crown of oak leaves as the German oak stands for heroism. Here you can see a picture of Germania, nationalism and imperialism. By the last quarter of the 19th century, nationalism no longer retained its idealist liberal democratic sentiment of the first half of the century, but became a narrow creed with limited ends. During this period, nationalist groups became increasingly intolerant of each other and ever ready to go to war. The major European powers in turn manipulated the nationalist aspirations of the subject peoples in Europe to further their own imperialist aims. The most serious source of nationalist tension in Europe after 1871 was the area called the Balkans. The Balkans was a region of geographical and ethnic variations comprising modern day Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, Bosnia Herzegovina, Slovenia, Serbia, and Montenegro, whose inhabitants were broadly known as Slavs. A large part of the Balkans was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The spread of the ideas of romantic nationalism in the Balkans, together with the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, made this region very explosive. All through the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had sought to strengthen itself through modernization and internal reforms, but with very little success. One by one, its European subject nationalities broke away from its control and declared independence. The Balkan people based their claims for independence or political rights on nationality and used history to prove that they had once been independent but had subsequently been subjugated by foreign powers. Hence, the rebellious nationalities in the Balkans thought of their struggles as attempts to win back their long lost long lost independence. As the different Slavic nationalities struggled to define their identity and independence, the Balkan area became an area of intense conflict. The Balkan states were fiercely jealous of each other and each hoped to gain more territory at the expense of the others. Matters were further complicated because the Balkans also became the scene of big power rivalry. During this period, there was intense rivalry among the European powers over trade and colonies, as well as naval and military might. These rivalries were very evident in the way the Balkan problem unfolded. Each power, Russia, Germany, England, Austro-Hungary, was keen on countering the hold of other powers over the Balkans and extending its own control over the area. This led to a series of wars in the region and finally the First World War. Nationalism, aligned with imperialism, led Europe to disaster in 1914, but meanwhile, many countries in the world which had been colonized by European powers in the 19th century began to oppose imperial domination. The anti imperial movements that developed everywhere were nationalist, in the sense that they all struggled to form independent nation states and were inspired by a sense of collective national unity forged in confrontation with imperialism. European ideas of nationalism were now replicated for people everywhere, developed their own specific variety of nationalism. But the idea that societies should be organized into nation states came to be accepted as natural and universal. So here this chapter ends. I know this chapter was very long and took 4 parts to complete, but after all it is now completed, and in the next video we will see the chapter nationalism in India.